Hey everyone, welcome to today's guest speaker session. For today's session, I'm joined by the wonderful Hayley, who is a midwife with many years of experience, and she's also a Hypnobirthing Australia practitioner. So, in today's discussion, we are chatting about birth preferences. So, understanding your birth preferences, writing it down, communicating it to your medical team, and what are some of the top tips from Hayley when it comes to communicating your birth preferences. So, a very important topic, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy this chat. So, let's get started. Welcome to today's chat, Hayley.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Wonderful. So would you like to let our listeners know a little bit about what you do and your experience?
Sure. So my name's Hayley. I'm a registered midwife and nurse. I've worked in the hospital system for many years now. My passion is education though. It's amazing how much really good quality evidence-based education can empower parents to have a really positive birthing experience. Which is the reason I created my own business, which is called Mother Midwife. And I do teach birth classes and hypnobirthing classes as well, just to really encourage that positive transition into parenthood, which starts with a really confident birth. So that's where my passion lies, is education.
That's wonderful, Hayley. So for today's topic, let us kickstart by just understanding if somebody is approaching the birth and probably it is their first birth, where do they start at? Like, how do they understand what options they have and understanding their own preferences? So what is your suggestion for that?
Absolutely. So I guess it comes down to being educated and knowing what's available to you where you are planning to birth. So whether in your hometown, whether you plan a hospital birth or home birth, I would do your research and really start with good quality education, because when you have that knowledge and that education behind you, that's what gives you all the confidence. And that's what will help you to create those birth preferences. And the birthing preferences are basically just written by parents to communicate their desires and their goals for birth. So because every birth is very individual, every family's requests are very individual. So what you may want for your birth may be different to what somebody else wants. So if you have that knowledge behind you, that's what prompts you to want to know more. Mm-hmm. And I always say to families when it comes to their birth, it's just about knowing what your options are. And if you don't know what your options are, it's quite simple that you don't have any options. So when you know what can happen, what happens to your body, what's available to you during birth, that's what really encourages you, to want to know more, and gives you that confidence. And as I said before, it flows on to parenthood as well. If you have that really positive birth, it's the best start to that really positive experience as parents as well.
Okay, so in your suggestion, what should a woman do if she's expecting, and what kind of research should she do? Where should she start from? Is it reading, Googling, attending childbirth classes? So what's your recommendation for that?
Definitely, I would encourage families to attend a childbirth education class. Find someone that aligns with your birth values. So someone that you, will get the most out of the classes with. And that's the most important thing, making sure that the evidence and the education that you get is evidence-based. That it's current, that it's based on research is the most important thing. In regards to Google, sometimes that can put fear in people's minds. They're not sure what to believe. I know in my experience as a midwife, quite often families present a lot more anxious, I guess, because of what they've read, and they don't know what's true and what's not. So that's where I would start, a really, really great childbirth education course. as I said, it's just the best start, and just make sure that it is current, and that it has everything that you want included, like in that education.
Yeah, yeah, okay. So Hayley, normally I believe childbirth education classes someone would take around those 30 weeks mark. Is that the recommendation?
Yes. Any I guess it's very individual, around
Yeah.
like between 20 and 30 weeks sometimes.
20 and 30, okay.
So yeah, families start to think more about the birth, I guess.
Okay.
Once they've hit that second trimester, or they might be over all of those first trimester symptoms, or a little bit nauseous and lethargic. Once they start feeling a little bit better in themselves, they start thinking more about the birth side of things, and the parenting side. In my like hypnobirthing courses, generally we say between 20 and 30 weeks is a good time to start, just because it gives families the opportunity to practice the techniques that we discuss. It helps to, I guess, when they've got time on their side, helps to encourage that discussion, particularly with birth preferences. They have that opportunity to discuss that with their care provider in weeks prior to birth. And they're already starting to think about what they would like and what they may want to avoid if possible, and so you can start having that discussion with your care provider at your appointments when you're ready. But it's very individual. Some women from 30 weeks, that's when they feel ready to start thinking about the birth, and that. So I guess it's just at that time where that's right for you. Some people don't want to think about it too early, and some people that's their best learning is when they are really prepared early. So but probably from around between 20 and 30 weeks normally is when people start thinking about the education they want to do, and start booking into classes as well.
Yeah, I do think so. That would give you good enough time to discuss and plan out things, and if you need to change anything.
Exactly.
Whereas 30 plus weeks would be a little less time, but certainly I'm sure a lot of women do that. 30 plus weeks. Wonderful.
Great.
So right. Hayley, just wanted to know, once you've decided on your birth preferences, whom should you communicate it to, and how early? And do you have any tips for communicating it?
Definitely. So it is really a really great idea to let your care provider know what your birth preferences are. And generally we say around that sort of 34-week mark is probably a good time to take that, if it's a written document, take that to your appointments and really go through it with your care provider. And normally families have started to think about it well in those weeks prior to that, but that's normally a really good time to start chatting with your care provider. It's really great for your birth partner to go through your birth preferences with you, and you create those birth preferences together, so they know exactly what you want for your birth. Quite often in labour, women sort of go into that zone, and it's normally their partner that is their advocate and might become their voice as well. So it's really essential that they are aware what the birthing parent wants for her labour and her birth as well. So it's really important that you do it together, so you're on the same page. And it just encourages that confidence, that excitement, I guess, and that preparation, like together, like when you are creating those birth preferences. That's probably is what like I'd recommend, and it just encourages that sense of control you feel in involved in your decision making, I guess. When it comes to when you communicate with your care providers, it shows them that you have done your research, that you're educated, active participant in your birth. It's not, remember that you're not the passenger, you're in the driver's seat when it comes to your birth. It's your journey. So and I know in my experience, like, I love when families come in and they know what they want, and they've done their research, and it's about knowing alternatives as well. So it's just a guide. Like, obviously birth preferences aren't a guarantee of outcomes. We don't have that crystal ball. We don't know how your labour and your birth is going to be, but it's also a really great way to look at different alternatives as well. So if the plan of care deviates, what is your plan B? What is your plan C? So for instance, if you planning like a water birth or being in the shower, and then you might get into labour and you might try it and you might hate it, what your other alternatives could be. So we just don't know what's going to work for it. So it might be that you try the TENS machine, or if you do want pharmaceutical pain relief, what are your options? So do you want the epidural, or would you prefer the gas as your first protocol? So it's it's about sort of knowing, if you have all of that knowledge, you know what's available to you, and when things happen, it's not foreign to you. If a midwife or a doctor suggests something to you, you're aware of what it means. And it all comes down to you making that informed decision that's in your best interests for your birth.
That's wonderful. So do you also suggest like carrying your birth plan, say, when you're going to the hospital, especially because whether it's a private or a public care, there are changes of shifts, and midwives could be different. So what's your suggestion on that? And as soon as you enter the hospital, do you like hand over your birth plan? So what's your suggestion on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's sometimes, like in hospitals, like if you're particularly in the private system, you might see your obstetrician like weekly or quite frequently in the lead up to the birth. And that's normally when we encourage you to bring your birth preferences in, so the written document. And normally in some hospitals, then that gets placed in your chart. So then when you come into hospital, whoever it is looking after you has a copy there. And I know that in my experience, I would normally, if I was looking after a mum, knowing that she's coming in labour, I would have already looked through her birth preferences. So I'd already have an understanding of what she wants and what she wants to try and avoid before I've even met her. So sometimes though, that's not the case. Like in the public system, again, it depends where you birth, you might not have as many appointments with your care provider. So I would always have a copy with you, just in case. And then you hand it to your midwife as you present to hospital, and that's really great. Like we just love that, because it just takes out all of the questioning. We can really allow you to be in your zone for your labour and your birth. We're not constantly asking questions because it's all there. So so definitely hand it to your care provider, and also have a copy with you when you present to hospital. So it's really important.
Yeah, thanks, Hayley. So coming to the next part, which is writing down your birth preferences. So what are the key topics that you should normally cover, whether you're going for vaginal birth or C-section? What are the key areas that you should list down?
Yeah, so it can be anything. So you can make your birth preferences as detailed as you like. So the common things that people, so for a vaginal birth, people will normally have things like if they want to use the water immersion, if they want to have a water birth, if they would prefer natural pain relief or medical type pain relief, such as the epidural, gas, tepidine, morphine. It can be things like who you want present, in the birthing suite, so your birthing support team. It can be things like what you want to use, so aromatherapy, music, being upright, active, who you want to cut the cord, what you want done with the placenta, if you want to take it home with you, all of those sort of things, like delayed cord clamping, so anything, but it can be down to the details of what you want to wear in labor. So if you're planning to wear your swimmers, like if you're in the bath or the shower, all of those things, it can be as detailed. The calming environment is really important to think about as well, so dimming the lights, aromatherapy music, affirmations, minimal talking, sometimes is a good thing to pop on birth preferences. So it can be anything you like. A lot of midwives will normally create that lovely space for you anyway. But it's really great to have that sort of documented and written down. In terms of cesarean as well, so if you have an elective or a planned cesarean, or if you require a cesarean from labor, again, it's having that really really calming environment. You can ask to have that that's immediate skin to skin in both types of birth, that lowering of the drape so you can see your baby, if who's going to announce the gender, like if you don't know, all of those sort of things is that you can put in your birth preferences. So again, it can be everything. It's about everything that you want to include, everything that you that are your desires, that are your goals. I would definitely write it down, and your care provider will do as whatever they can to achieve that and make it the most positive birth possible.
That's really good to know. And just for our listeners, Hayley has shared a wonderful template with us to list down your birth preferences and the areas that you can possibly cover. And if you are a Mother's Yoga member, you can access that inside the portal. So going on to the next topic, in your view, Hayley, why do you think is noting down your birth preferences important, both from the mother's side who is going to give birth and also from the medical team's side?
I just think it encourages that open disclosure, that open communication, and it's all about just having that birth that is the most positive for the family. And everyone's ideals of birth are going to be completely different. It doesn't matter what type of birth that you have, it should be that positive experience. And it does give that family a voice as well. I think families need to realize that birth doesn't need to be, it's not dictated to you, that you're in control. You're an active participant. You have a voice. And I think that's what birth preferences do, is it encourages you to have that confidence to advocate for yourself, and to realize how empowering education is. And I think in my experience as well, when families know their options, and if the plan of care deviates in any way, they still are more likely to have a positive experience when they've been informed of what's happening. They know, they've done their research prior, they know what's happening. And even if, the birthing class changes or deviates, they still have that really positive experience because they're still informed, and they've made, that they've realized that birthing preferences has altered, and but it can still have that really positive outcome because they're educated, they're informed, and care providers just understand what's important to each unique family. I think that's the biggest thing. So I think it's just a lovely way, and I think families have so much more confidence when they have that knowledge behind them as well.
Okay, that's interesting. So both can make sure that it's a positive experience
Exactly.
from the medical team side as well as from the lady who's giving birth. Uh, yeah, that's wonderful. So Hayley, sometimes, as we know, like birth is unpredictable, and you might have laid out some preferences, and what if things don't go as per the plan? So what's your suggestion in that case?
Definitely. And it's so important to realize that, because we don't have that crystal ball. We don't know how your labor and birth is going to be. So I guess it is just, again, if you know what your options are and the plan of care deviates, you know what your plan B is, what your plan C is, what your plan D is if it comes to that. But and we don't, so birth preferences doesn't mean that that things are definitely going to happen or it's concrete. You can change your birthing preferences at any time as well. So that's what's most important as well. You don't have to write them during pregnancy and then have to stick by them in labor. As I said before, you might get to a point where when you're in labor that you might not like the water which you thought that you would like. So it means that you have to alter what you are doing. So it means, but then you know what your alternatives are. You know that you can utilize the TENS machine, your movement, your positioning, your acupressure, your aromatherapy, your massage instead. Or if you don't, it's not about having the most natural birth either. So if you want to use that medical pain relief, do you want to use the gas first, or is your first preference the epidural? So, or start it with the gas and see how you go, knowing the epidural is that plan C if you need it. So it's all of those things as well, and that's what the most important thing is, because when I in my experience with families, it's when the plan of care deviates, they still feel in control and they've made that decision in their best interests. And I think that's what's the biggest thing is about having that positive birth, is when women are in control and feel like they're an active participant in their birth. That's what comes down to a positive birth. It's not about having, a non-medication free birth, or, having a quick labor or anything like that. It's the positive birth is normally guided by that, feeling in control, feeling informed, and being part, of that journey, that they're in control. And I guess one of the biggest things as a midwife that I normally hear, a very common thing that I hear people say, is that they will just, when it comes to their labor and birth, that they are just going to go with the flow, and that they'll just wing it when it comes to labor and see what happens. And I guess when you don't have that education behind you, you're more inclined to go with somebody else's flow rather than your own flow. And you're more inclined to go with what somebody else wants rather than what you want. So that's the thing. Even if things change, you're making that decision that's in your best interest, and in your baby's best interest, because you have that knowledge behind you. Even if it changes, it deviates, it should still be that really positive experience.
Interesting. I just had a question on that. If somebody doesn't write a birth plan, essentially, how are their preferences checked during birth? So do you have any tips or suggestions around that, how to navigate if you haven't written your birth plan?
No worries. Absolutely. And it doesn't mean that just because it's not documented and it's written that your wishes won't be respected. It will just mean that you'll have more of that discussion in labor. Your midwife will ask you, what your plans were, what your your birth looks like, that positive birth, the things that you wanted to include, things that you wanted to try and avoid. I've had many women that haven't written birth plans, and we have that discussion normally when they present to hospital and throughout their labor, which is fine. Like you can still have the most positive outcomes, and we just adapt to that situation. It just means that when it's written there and and you have it there, and and it's been discussed with your birth partner, with your care provider, that when you are in labour, that we have sort of that, we've already had that sort of open communication, and we sort of know what you want, so we're not bothering you as much, asking you questions and things like that, of what you want to include in your labour. The important thing to note though is that when you are in labour, you'll have a midwife there that will guide you. Like that's what our role is. Like we're very good at observing where you are in your labour, by just observing your breathing techniques, your facial expressions, your behaviours. A lot of midwives will be able to tell the stages of labour and where a woman is in her labour, purely based on just watching her. And that's, so we don't need to disturb you, but we will also suggest things as well. So if it looks like something's not working for you, we're there to guide you and suggest different things that you could try throughout your labour as well. So it's not, you don't have to write it down, but it is a great idea, because it shows that it just, I think it when you write it down, it prompts you to want to know more and to do that research, and also look at different alternatives, as we mentioned before. So if the plan of care deviates, you've looked at other options and other things that you can do, rather than just in that spot. But if But as I said, you'll have someone there to guide you throughout your birth. But that education prior, it's so empowering and really sort of encourages a really confident family as they sort of approach that birthing day. And from my own personal experience, I can add that having these kind of discussions when you are in labor is not very pleasant. So it's so true, because sometimes you don't want to be in that zone and you don't want to be bothered, and sometimes someone asking you lots of questions can sort of get you out of that zone as well. So
and when you're in labor, you really want to be in that zone, like you said. And if somebody is disturbing you with questions, it just changes the whole thing.
Exactly. And that's why, another reason why it's so good for your partners to know, so the people, the birthing support team, to know your preferences. So if you don't document it, but you've had a chat about it, they can chat to the midwife and on your behalf, so you can remain sort of in that zone. So it's good to be on the same page with your birthing team, so they know the things that you want to achieve in your labour and things that you may want to avoid, if possible. It's because then it can allow you to be in that bit of that zone as well, and they can be your voice. So, but that's it's so true. We just get in that zone and don't want to come out of it.
So Hayley, coming to the last part of this conversation, what is your top tip relating to this topic, and if somebody wants to communicate their birth preferences to their medical team, what is the number one tip that you would suggest?
Absolutely. So definitely having that knowledge behind you, knowing all of your options, because as we said, sometimes, as we mentioned earlier, like that sometimes when you might communicate it early on in your pregnancy, your goals might change as the weeks go by, or sometimes you might have circumstances that arise in your pregnancy as well. So for instance, you may require an induction, or different things pop up as well. So I guess if you have that knowledge behind you, regardless of what presents, you are still making that informed choice. In ensuring that your team, your healthcare professional, your midwives are on that same page. Also researching your hospital as well, or your intended place of birth, just to make sure that they have the facilities to accommodate your birth preferences. So for instance, if you wanted to have a water birth, does your hospital actually do water births? Do they have a bath available to you, or do they just have a shower? So also, do all of that research. Do they have, you want aromatherapy in your labor? Do they have any diffusers, or do you have to bring things in from home? So anything that you write down that you want to have in your labor and birth, also check with your care provider and your hospital and make sure that is possible, just to avoid any disappointment or anything when you get to hospital or at your intended place of birth, because you don't want to have your heart set on something only to find out that you can't have a water birth. Like that. So definitely lots of education. Do your research, communicate, encourage that open communication with your care provider from a really good or early gestation in your pregnancy as well. And antenatal education, I think, is really important. Finding a midwife and that aligns with your birthing values, I think, is really important, because that's what's going to facilitate the best education for you. You're going to take in all of that knowledge when you are enjoying what you're listening to, and you have that rapport, I think, with the person educating you. But education, I think everything sort of does come back to education, and just knowing what your options are, because it really does encourage that confident birth, and understand your body. When you have that knowledge behind you, you understand what your body goes through in labor and for birthing. So when you recognize those signs, it's pretty empowering when you have that understanding and that education behind you.
And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. It was so lovely to have you, and hopefully we see you again for another chat on Mother's Yoga.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so lovely. Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of today's chat. Thank you so much, Hayley, for joining us. It's been so wonderful to have you share your knowledge on this topic, and I'm sure our listeners will hugely benefit by listening to this discussion. Thanks so much.